Chapter 33 of Job, verse 4, the Spirit of God has made me, and the breath of the Almighty gives me life. It's very apparent here in probably the oldest book in the Bible, Job, probably taking us clear back to the patriarchal time, probably penned before the Pentateuch even, that they understood that they were made by God. The psalmist has the same concept. Look at Psalm 22. Psalm 22. David, in a similar situation to Job, trying to figure out his problems, goes back to the fact that he knows God made him. Psalm 22, verse 9, yet thou art he who didst bring me forth from the womb. Thou didst make me trust when upon my mother's breasts. Upon thee I was cast from birth. Thou hast been my God from my mother's womb. From the time I was in the womb, you made me, and you were my God. The 100th Psalm, and we can't read all the scriptures related, but the 100th Psalm says in verse 3, know that the Lord himself is God. It is he who has made us, and not we ourselves. You say, well, we made a baby. No, you didn't really make a baby. You are the human instrumentation through which God made a baby. Let me tell you something. You can transmit the physical features, but you cannot make a soul. You understand that? You cannot, through sexual relationships, create an immortal, eternal soul. At the time of conception, when the physical factors come together, God has to impart a soul. In Psalm 104, in verse 30, thou dost send forth thy Spirit, they are created. Reminding us that the Spirit of God is the creating force. In Jeremiah 1:5, God said to Jeremiah, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I consecrated you. I knew you, yada, as a rational creature. Galatians 1:15. Paul says, but when he who had set me apart, even from my mother's womb, and called me through his grace, and so forth. Paul knew, Jeremiah knew, any Christian knows that God had his hand on us from the time of conception, and that our eternal destiny was set from that moment, and the purpose and plan for our service to God was set from that moment. The New Testament emphasizes this in a majestic way. Look at Matthew chapter 1, the birth of Christ. This is quite an important illustration that often is not considered. Matthew 1:18, now the birth of Jesus Christ was as follows. When his mother Mary had been betrothed to Joseph, they were engaged, not yet married. They had not come together in sexual relationship. She was found to be with child by the Holy Spirit. Now this is very embarrassing to Joseph because here he believed in his heart that this young girl was a spiritually committed girl, a righteous and holy girl, that she was a virgin and pure. And all of a sudden she is pregnant, and he was a good man and a righteous man and didn't want to disgrace her and shame her publicly. He could have stoned her publicly, so he decided to just divorce her secretly. He was embarrassed and couldn't understand how this could happen. But when he had considered this, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream, saying, Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid to take Mary as your wife, for that which has been conceived in her is of the Holy Spirit. The point I want you to note is this, that God is involved in the very act of conception. Not only in the case of Jesus Christ, but of any life born in the womb. It is no less true of me or you or anyone else born into this world that God was involved in our conception. The difference is we didn't have a virgin birth. Jesus had no earthly father. But we are nonetheless the product of God's creative hand through his Holy Spirit who breathes life into everything. Furthermore, the life in the womb of Mary was no impersonal blob. It was no fetal material. It was the Son of God. That life began at conception. Christ came into the world at conception. Look at Luke 1. And I'll see if I can't give you another New Testament illustration. Luke 1:41 says, it came about that when Elizabeth heard Mary's greeting, Elizabeth, you remember, was pregnant with John the Baptist. When Elizabeth heard Mary's greeting, the baby leaped in her womb, and Elizabeth was filled with the Holy Spirit. Of course, John the Baptist was filled with the Holy Spirit even from his mother's womb also, as it tells us in Luke 1:15. So the Holy Spirit was already involved in the life of John the Baptist, as the Holy Spirit is involved in any life, because he is the one who breathes life. But in a unique way, the Holy Spirit was somehow involved in the life of John the Baptist, even in the womb, as in the life of Jesus Christ in the womb. And whatever that means, it says the baby leaped in her womb. It must mean that somehow that child responded to what was occurring on the outside. The Holy Spirit moved that little life into some movement. And it's a wonderful thing to contemplate, even though it's mysterious to comprehend. Notice the word baby, and that's the key point here. The word baby is brephos. The baby leaped. Would you please notice, this word is used in chapter 2, verse 12, chapter 2, verse 16, chapter 18, verse 15, 1 Peter 2:2, and other places. For a living baby that has been born. Here it is used for a baby that hasn't been born. Listen carefully to what I say. It is the word used for unborn or born babies. They didn't have a different word. They didn't call it a fetus. It was a baby. Unborn, it was a baby born. No separate word was needed. Once the infant is created, it is the baby. If it's unborn or born, the actual moment of birth doesn't determine the viability or the life. The life is at conception, and thus the babe is the babe in the womb, the babe out of the womb. No different terminology. This is not a mere collection of cells. This is a baby. This is a baby. Conception then is the act of God, whereby a person is created by God's sovereign will. A soul is breathed into the living tissue by the Holy Spirit. That soul's destiny is already known to God and determined by Him from before the foundation of the world. Abortion then becomes a violent anti-God act. It is not only a murder of the individual, it is an affront to the Creator. Now somebody says, well, now wait a minute. What about the deformed people that are born? Is God the creator of those? Exodus chapter 4 and verse 11, God says, who has made man's mouth? Or who makes him dumb or deaf or seeing or blind? Is it not I, the Lord? I make them that way. It's for His purposes sometimes to make men dumb and deaf and seeing and blind. You remember in John chapter 9, the man born blind, and the disciples said, who sinned, this man or his parents? And Jesus said, nobody. This man was born blind for the glory of God. God made it that way. And so the first point, and the point at which you must start any biblical discussion, is that conception is an act of God. An act in which 23 chromosomes from a father and 23 chromosomes come together in a strip of DNA that makes a life. And at the moment of that physical coming together, God then, by the agency of His Holy Spirit, breathes a soul, an immortal, eternal soul that transcends the body, for it will live forever, though the body will die. And at conception, then you have life. To kill that life is to play God. And as serious an affront as it is against the life itself, it is a more serious one against the God who is the Creator. And that is why it is the ultimate decline in our culture. It is the ultimate evidence of the wretchedness of our culture. It is the ultimate proof of how deep our atheism runs, that we kill life that God creates. We have usurped the sovereign throne, and we are now God. And we will determine who lives and who dies. And this is spilling over, my friends, into euthanasia, which is coming, you better know, like a hurricane to wash away our whole old population. Because we're God now, and we'll decide. This kind of atheism